Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We welcome all of you to this digital analytics program learning series for creating your own campaign URL builder and also getting to know campaign URLs a little bit better if you don't. My name's Tim Loudon. I'm the program manager for the digital analytics program. And I want to just note a few things before I pass it off to my colleague, Freddie Blicker, who's going to be our presenter today. Firstly, the slides will be sent to you after the webinar, so you don't have to be furiously taking any notes or anything like that. And additionally, we record all these trainings and they're put up on our YouTube Analytics playlist, which you will also be sent a link to following the presentation. Also in that email, and I believe towards the end of the presentation, the link will also be put in the chat box that you can access here, will be the survey that we ask you to complete to let us know how we did. And we really appreciate anyone who takes the time, the 3 minutes, to fill that out. I will be in the chat function. If anyone has questions during the presentation, you can type them into the chat box, and I'll be moderating in there, and I can answer questions as they come up. For broader questions, we'll also be passing them back to Freddie at the end of the presentation when we will have a Q&A session. Okay, with that, I will throw it over to the inimitable Freddie Blicker so that you all can enjoy today's presentation. Freddie, take it away.
Thanks, Tim. Hey, folks. Really excited to be presenting today to you on how to create your own campaign URL builder. So this is a perennial topic that always comes up, and today we're going to be unpacking this for you so that you understand what campaign URLs are and really how to kind of connect the dots between your offsite marketing campaigns and your website. So what you'll learn today, we've got a number of things we need to cover in 1 hour. This is a lot of material, so bear with us. We're going to be covering what are custom campaign URLs. You'll know what they are, how to use them, when to use them, how do you create a tagging strategy, how to create an Excel or a Google Sheet campaign URL builder to actually use for your campaigns, and then how to document your custom campaign URLs to use for reporting later on. So a lot of interesting stuff that I think you will find very useful in today's webinar. Okay, so you may recall a previous webcast that the DAP team did on campaign URLs about a year ago. When you receive this deck today after the webcast, you will have a link to that in there. You can feel free to review that. But for folks who are joining this webcast today, if you've already seen the previous webcast, we ask you to hang with us. We've built something new that we think you'll really enjoy. So do bear with us. It's going to be a lot of material and some really cool things that we'll show you how to use to make your life and your reporting that much more easier. Okay, so as if analytics wasn't complicated enough, I'm sure everyone here knows that analytics is complicated, reporting is complicated, understanding which metrics, which KPIs, which business questions to answer. All of this is challenging stuff for everyone in government because everyone's site is different. Everyone's site mission, objective, business questions are all different. So to add to this, you may find that campaign URLs make this even more complicated. Now, I'm sure many of you on the webcast feel like Conan and you're screaming silently, why? We understand. This is a challenge for any web analyst, for any analytics team. This goes for the private sector, for government, for any organization using any analytics tool. You have this challenge. You will experience this challenge, but the DAP team is here today to help you unpack this and hopefully provide a really useful solution to help you find the path of least resistance to get actionable insights and reporting from Google Analytics. So now I'm sure you're wondering why you need to use campaign URLs. Well, let's talk a little bit about this. So really, you need to use campaign URLs to connect the dots between any offsite marketing campaigns and the traffic that those campaigns send back to your site. So let's talk about an example. What do I mean by this? So by offsite marketing campaign, I'm referring to, as an example, an email campaign. So your team sends out an email blast It has links pointing back to your site. This is an example of an off-site marketing campaign that sends traffic back to your site. Now, you need to use campaign URLs to track these email campaigns. So any links that point back to your site, you need to append campaign URLs to those links. So let's talk about what happens if you don't use campaign URLs. Well, first thing, you won't have any reporting. Campaign URLs connect the dots between any type of off-site marketing campaign engagement and your website, right? So you need these campaign URLs to append to these links, which then tell Google how to interpret the traffic hitting your website from this email campaign. Okay, so if you don't use campaign URLs, you'll have no reporting. Because you'll have no reporting, you won't have any understanding of how effective that email campaign was or that social media campaign was. As a result of that, you will have no insights to take back to your team or to understand how effective your marketing campaign was. And at the end of the day, you'll be left thinking, what was the point of that, right? Spent all this time, this effort, numerous hours putting together this campaign, but you're not able to connect the dots because you didn't use campaign URLs. So we want to avoid this type of scenario and help you avoid this scenario by explaining to you how to use these campaign URLs. Okay, so let's recap. To understand campaign performance, you need to use campaign URLs for any offsite marketing campaign. If there's one thing that you take away from today's webcast, this is it. You need to use them. Okay, so we're talking about marketing campaigns, and I realize various folks in the call on the webcast today may have different roles. They may not engage with marketing campaigns. So I want to step back a bit and take a 30,000-foot view of everything and just speak to what is a marketing campaign. So in general, a marketing campaign is some type of outreach on different channels external to your website. So off-site, not on-site. This is off-site. So this is outreach that essentially drives traffic back to your website. Now that could take the form of an email campaign, a social media campaign on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn, whatever platform you're using for social. If your agency is using paid search, that's another off-site marketing tactic that drives traffic back to your website. So really the takeaway here is a marketing campaign is some type of outreach that occurs off-site. So when we're talking about campaign URLs, we're always referring to off-site, never on-site. Now, for the purpose of many folks on the webcast today, government campaigns typically focus on email and social media. There are some agencies that do use paid search. We'll have some graphics throughout this presentation that just kind of looks at email, paid search, social media. Just know that whatever email or whatever marketing channel you're using, they all require campaign URLs. And we'll be going through some different examples to help you kind of unpack what this means and how you need to implement campaign URLs. So that's the 30,000-foot view of a marketing campaign. So let's move on. So the big takeaway from the previous slide was you use campaign URLs to connect the dots between external, off-site marketing campaigns and your website. You don't use them on your site, and we'll speak to some more nuances later on as we get into the actual meat of the webcast. All right, so I'm sure many of you are wondering, what are campaign URLs? Well, let's talk about that. So campaign URLs are simply URLs. So your website URL could be mysite.gov that you see on this slide as an example. They are simply URLs with query parameters that appear after the question mark. Okay, so you append these query campaign parameters to any link, any offsite link that points back to your website. So these are typically going to be links in email, social media, paid search, just like we mentioned before. We want to drive home these points. The parameters, these campaign URL parameter values for UTM source, UTM medium, and UTM campaign, these essentially tell Google how to interpret and record the type of traffic that you're sending back to your site. So whether that traffic came from an email campaign, or a social media campaign from Twitter, or from Facebook, or from paid search. So remember, they're simply parameters that tell Google how to interpret and record the traffic that you're sending back to your site. So here in the color coding at the bottom of the slide is an example. This is mysite.gov, question mark, UTM source, ampersand, UTM medium, ampersand, UTM campaign. So what does this all mean? Well, let's unpack this further. So let's talk about these parameters, right? So in my example, I have mysite.gov. Now in green, that's the website URL. Now all of these parameters you need to include so that you have data in Google Analytics that later on, after your marketing campaign, you can then go back and pivot off of different parameters to understand the performance of these parameters, which you're using in your email campaigns or in your social media campaigns. So on this slide, we have an example of what these parameters look like in practice, right? So let's say I'm going to use mysite.gov in the email campaign. Well, let's go through the URL, the source, the medium, and the campaign values here. Okay, so URL in green, that's self-explanatory. This is just the page on your site where you're going to send users. So I'm sending my users in an email campaign to mysite.gov. Okay, now I need to tell Google Analytics when this email traffic hits mysite.gov. I need to tell Google Analytics where it's coming from, what type of traffic it is, what the campaign name is. And this is the purpose of UTM source, UTM medium, and UTM campaign. Okay, so let's go into UTM source in the pink. So UTM source is simply going to be a value that tells Google, the referring website, the marketing campaign, the advertiser, the et cetera, that is sending traffic to your sites. This is where the user is coming from. So it could be newsletter, it could be Google, it could be Facebook, and so on. It really just depends on the type of campaign that you're sending. Now, I mentioned in my example, I'm sending an email campaign. So in this case, I'm going to call the source newsletter, for example. Okay, let's look at the next parameter. UTM medium in the light green. This is simply the marketing channel where a user is coming from. So this could be email, social, paid search. Now in my example, I'm doing an email campaign. So for UTM medium, I would include email as the value here. Okay. Last but not least, UTM campaign. This is simply the campaign name. So this is a unique name of your choosing that defines your whatever campaign you've launched. So in my particular case, I'm going to call this email-newsletter 02/14/2018. So February 14, 2018. So I can basically put whatever I want in the UTM campaign name. It has to be user-friendly so that I know what the value is, so that I can go into Google Analytics a week after the email campaign blast drops. I can go back in and pivot off of these different values to actually create reporting and understand how effective this email campaign was. So that's kind of the big picture view of this. You are programming different values into these parameters, appending them to the URL that you're including in your email or your social media campaign, etc., so that when a user clicks on this link on Facebook or in an email, Google Analytics is able to pick up these parameters, ingest them, process them, and then present them to me in a report that I can then use to easily identify this campaign's performance. So this is the kind of framework that we're looking at today in today's webcast. Now, there's a lot to really unpack here. So let's kind of dive in a little bit more here. A couple things to note. These values are case sensitive. We recommend you use lowercase values. We will dive a little bit more deeper into that in a slide coming up. But moving on. I want to show you where in Google Analytics you would actually go to see the performance of these campaign URLs. Okay, so if you're following along at home, I am in DAP right now, and I am. You can choose any profile. Doesn't have to be this particular view. You can choose your own agency view. I have navigated to acquisition, campaigns, and all campaigns. Now, let's connect the dots here. Let me pull up the example. Now remember, we've got mysite.gov, UTM source, medium, campaign. So let's look at this all campaigns report. We have source, medium, and campaign. Now Google makes it very easy to toggle between all of these. So now I hope this connects the dots between how important it is that you understand and have a consistent tagging methodology between your UTM parameters and your marketing campaigns, because those UTM parameters will literally program and appear in the all campaigns report exactly as you encode them. That's why it is really important to have consistency and to have a strategy with how you're creating these and documenting them, so that when you go back, you don't run into an issue where you have all lowercase email and then an issue with all uppercase email, as in row 1 and row 5, right? That creates challenges when you're trying to report on the effectiveness of a campaign if you're using inconsistent different case values. So this is where you would go to understand the effectiveness of a specific campaign using these campaign URL parameters. Okay. Now I want to talk a bit about channel reports in Google Analytics. So what do I mean by that? So in this particular view, I am looking under acquisition, all traffic, and channels. Now, you'll see here, we have the primary dimension here of default channel grouping. So this is the 30,000 foot view, so to speak, of every marketing channel that your site has reporting on from Google Analytics. So you'll see here, organic search, referral, direct, social, email, other, paid search, etc. Right? So now in theory, email includes all of the campaign URL data that you've programmed into your email campaigns. So the channels report is related to the campaigns report. And it's really important that you have consistency in how you program your source, medium, and campaign parameter values, so that data from your campaign URLs is categorized correctly within the default channel grouping report. Now, the advantage of doing that is that you can quickly go to the channel report and say, okay, for email, I know I've consistently and strategically tagged all of my email marketing campaigns with the appropriate UTM campaign URL parameters. So I can just go in here and I know for certain that this is all of my data. So that's the beauty of making sure that you have consistent campaign URLs so that you can get a quick pulse check on your reporting for your email campaign channel. So that is the channel report. We will dive a little bit more into this in more detail in a slide coming up. So more to come on that. I want to speak briefly about case sensitivity. So in the previous slide, I mentioned that we recommend using lower case. So in my example in the campaigns report, I'm sure everyone saw in row 1, we have lowercase email. In row 2, we have email in all caps, right? Google Analytics does not combine these. So clearly in this situation, an agency has launched a campaign, an email campaign, using email in lowercase and using email in uppercase. So what's the problem with that? Well, Google uses rules to process data from campaign URLs. Now, campaign URL values are case sensitive for certain values. I'll give you a couple examples. Social media. You could use uppercase and you could use lowercase for social. And Google would using its rules, would know to categorize that as social in your channel report. Now, here's where it gets a little bit nuanced. For email, Google's rules only allow you to define email as lowercase. So if you include all uppercase letters that say email, this traffic here will not show up in the email channel. So I'll repeat that. If you use anything different from Google's rules, and in this example, I'm using email, which Google says they will only process lowercase email. They will not process anything uppercase. In row 5 here, this email traffic will not appear in the email channel. It will actually appear in the other channel. So you can see why case sensitivity is so important and why it's so important to have a strategy in place and a consistent tagging strategy in place so that you avoid situations as confusing as this. So long story short, the DAP team advises you to use lowercase in all campaign URL parameters. Now, one other scenario that I did want to speak a little bit about. Now, you can set your medium to be any value you want. You could set it to green apple, for example. Not that I would recommend that. But if you are doing an email campaign and you select something other than email, remember in our example, your email traffic, because you've defined medium as something different from lowercase email, will not show up in this email channel here. Now, one thing to note, you'll notice in email channel or in the channel grouping here, everything is uppercase. That's confusing. There's a disconnect there. But trust us, just use lowercase parameter values and they will be categorized correctly for social and for email. And we'll get into a little bit more about how you actually do that later on in this presentation. Okay, so a couple caveats and some main reasons to use campaign URLs. So email, we're talking a lot about that. Lots of agencies send a lot of email. If you don't use campaign URLs in email reporting, you will have no email reporting. Your traffic will show up as direct, which is not the case. It came from email. But because you did not connect the dots using campaign URLs between your email traffic, sending traffic to your site, Google Analytics does not know how to attribute any type of credit to your email campaign, so they list it as direct. So that's reason number one, that you need to use campaign URLs. Reason number two, link shorteners. So I'm sure there's a lot of folks who manage social media using Bitly or Hootsuite, etc. These platforms, these link shorteners, strip the referrer from your URL. And if you're not using campaign URLs, when your traffic from social hits your website, Google Analytics does not record traffic as coming from social. It's recorded as direct. So you automatically lose any credit from your social link shortening services. You don't get any credit for that traffic going to your website. It'll appear as if somebody typed in mysite.gov in their browser. It will not appear as if somebody came from Twitter or from Facebook. So DAP team advises you to use campaign URLs on the link, so mysite.gov, question mark, and then the UTM source, campaign, and medium values, then shorten that link so that the campaign URLs are able to fire and tell Google where the traffic's coming from. One other reason to use campaign URLs, some agencies do use paid search. It's rare, but some do. You need to use campaign URLs with paid search. Otherwise, you don't know how these paid search ads are performing. And you're spending money to actually use these paid search campaigns. So you need to understand your return on investment and whether or not these paid search campaigns are actually performing in the way that you intend them to. So that's why you would need to use campaign URLs for any type of paid search campaign. And by paid search campaign, for anyone who's not in the know, that's simply the ads that appear when you search for something on Google or any other search engine. They appear on the right-hand side of your screen. They're typically called paid search or paid ads. That's what we're referring to. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that we cannot use campaign URLs on site. And I imagine some of you were wondering, well, why not? So think about this. If you go to gsa.gov, and I'll just do this as a quick example. We don't actually have campaign URLs in our content, but let me just kind of emulate what I'm talking about. Now, I'm on gsa.gov, and let's say, for example, if somebody had a link on this page that had gsa.gov, question mark, UTM source, campaign, medium, and let's say the medium was defined as email. Well, if I click that link with the campaign URLs, any click on that link starts a new session. So it basically makes your data dirty. So you're actually counting 2 sessions there. So you're over counting. That's what a campaign URL does, is it stops the previous session from the same user and starts a new one. Now, the other tricky thing in this example is that because the link was tagged with campaign URLs and the medium was defined as email, this now gives credit to whatever medium you had in the URL. So it's something occurring on site, but then you're artificially inflating the data for this email campaign. So that's not good either. That doesn't give you insight. And it actually gives you bad data that could potentially make you think that your email campaign is performing better than it was because you use that in an on-site context. So it's more of a complex concept. I won't belabor this too much, but if you have any questions or concerns, always feel free to contact us at DAP support, and we can kind of look at the question that you have about this. But these are important in understanding campaign URLs. Okay, so let's jump into the material here on looking at where you use these. Again, campaign URLs are only for external offsite marketing campaigns where you point back to your site. Do not use them on site. This is a visual of your email campaigns, your paid search, social media campaigns, pointing to your site with links using campaign URLs. This is your ideal state. You're always using campaign URLs off-site on links that point back to your site. Okay, so I have a couple scenarios to help folks think through this. We're going to use the chat feature. So Tim's monitoring the chat box right now. So feel free to type in your thoughts on what is true about this scenario. So I'm going to go through the next couple of slides and just illustrate what this all is, right? All right, so here's a scenario for this slide and the next 3 slides. So you spent hours preparing, and then you launch an email, social, and paid search campaigns that send your users back to your site. So you want to get credit for your hard work. And in this scenario, you do use campaign URLs. So you've correctly tagged everything for email, paid search, social media, using the campaign URLs that we spoke about in a previous slide. So what is true about this scenario? A, you can create Google Analytics reports on marketing campaign performance. B, you can't create Google Analytics reports on performance. C, your boss will be happy. So what is true? Now, there are potentially multiple answers here. So what is true about this scenario when you have used campaign URLs correctly? And Tim, feel free to jump in with any feedback that anyone has in the chat feature, and then I'll jump into the actual answer.
I think people are being shy, Freddie. Maybe we should just go ahead and give away
All
the
right.
answer.
Okay, so this is your ideal state. So you've done a good job here. So the answer here, what is true about this scenario, is A, you can create Google Analytics reports because you use campaign URLs. And C, your boss will be happy because you can go back to your boss and say, here's the impact of my marketing campaigns. Remember, this is when you use campaign URLs. Okay, next scenario. You don't use campaign URLs. What is true about this scenario? Okay, I'm just going to start going through this since we are running out of time and I want to make sure that we get through all the content. All right, so in this scenario, you don't use campaign URLs. This is not a good scenario. You just spent tons of hours preparing, and you're not going to be able to create Google Analytics reports on your marketing campaign performance. And I can imagine your boss won't be happy. So that's what happens when you don't use campaign URLs. All right, scenario 3. You don't use campaign URLs on an email campaign. So what do you think happens here? So you've spent hours preparing all these email campaigns. You launch them. You want credit for your work. You want to understand how people are engaging with them. Are you making an impact? Right? But you decided not to use campaign URLs on an email campaign. What's true about this scenario? Well, think about that. We've spoken about a couple examples with email campaigns and what happens. So the answer here is that email traffic is not tracked, and it will appear as direct traffic. So you lose all visibility into your email campaign performance. It looks like your email user traffic just went to the site by typing your address. So this is also not a good scenario to be in. Remember, you need to use campaign URLs on email campaigns. Otherwise, it'll just show up as a totally different type of traffic. Okay, scenario 4. You use inconsistent campaign URLs for your different marketing campaigns. So remember I spoke earlier about case sensitivity or about using different values other than the ones that Google has rules for and how they know how to process. So in this scenario, let's say, for example, your medium, instead of email, you use green apple. So what's true about this scenario? So in this scenario, this is also bad. Now, you can create Google Analytics reports on marketing campaign performance, but you will have to create complicated reporting that does not roll up to email. You'll have to look for green apple in your medium. So because you didn't abide by Google Analytics rules, you will be forced to create custom reports on values that you may not even remember why you used them. So that's a challenge. Now, the challenge here as well is that this traffic is now going to appear under the other channel. Now, remember, I went through the default channel grouping report under all traffic. This, instead of appearing under the email channel, because you inconsistently tagged with campaign URL values that were not in alignment with Google Analytics rules, it'll appear under other. So you'll have to figure out how to slice and dice the other channel to understand your email campaign effectiveness. And I doubt your boss will be happy about this. It'll take you a lot of time. So avoid this situation. All right, so to recap, I want to drive this home. If you don't use campaign URLs, you've destroyed your marketing campaign reporting. This is not good. So you want to avoid this. So if you don't avoid this, you don't get credit for your work because you can't create reporting. So you don't want to be like Tobey Maguire. Okay, so that was a lot of material. And I'm sure some of you got it. Some of you maybe are still learning about this. Some of you are brand new. That's okay. It's okay to feel like your mind has been blown. Analytics is complicated. Everyone struggles with this. This is the whole point as to why we're doing this webcast today, because we want to help you figure this out. So let's keep on moving on. So how do we figure out how to mitigate against making these types of mistakes with our campaign strategy, with campaign URLs, to avoid these types of scenarios where it makes our lives more difficult to create reporting, or we lose all visibility in our reporting? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about how do you create a tagging strategy. Now, in previous DAP webcasts, I know we've talked about the campaign URL builder. For those of you who are not familiar with this tool, just Google it. It'll pop up. This is where you can enter in your website URL, your campaign source, medium, and name. So this very easily creates a campaign URL for you to use in any type of campaign that you want. Now, this is just an example, but here's the challenge. You have to do each of these links one-off. So you can only do individual links at a time. So you can't scale this. If you have email campaigns dropping every other week, you need a way to both create these at scale so that you can distribute them to your social media managers or your email managers. And you need a way to document these so that you have them in one place so that you can go back and know how to pull the reporting and how to interpret the reporting. So using the campaign URL builder from Google is fine, but it's too time consuming. It's too easy to make all those spelling and capitalization mistakes that we've already talked about in today's webcast. It's too easy to miscategorize these and choose the wrong value when you're having to input custom values here. And it's too easy to forget what the recommended parameters are. So that's the situation we're up against. So how do we scale this? Well, the answer to this is pretty straightforward. You have to create a campaign URL builder tool in Excel or Google Sheets by becoming an Excel and Google Sheets formula wizard. So who knows how to concatenate? So this looks like a lot of fun for some people, but it also looks really terrible and really time consuming. And who has the time for this? So it's okay if you feel this way, like your head is exploding. That's pretty much everyone's reaction. But that's where the DAP team comes in. We know that you don't have time to put this type of campaign strategy together. So for the low, low price of free, the DAP team has built you a campaign URL builder in both Excel and Google Sheets. And we're excited to share this with you today. And you will be receiving these tools after today's webcast. So let's walk through some examples. So I am using the Google Sheets example. On my screen, this looks exactly the same in Excel, so you'll get both of these. Now, remember the example that we had, mysite.gov. And then we had the question mark, and then we had the medium, the source, the campaign name, etc. You basically use this tool, you open it up in either Google Sheets or Excel, and you enter in the values for your URL. And then there is a drop-down that limits you to what values you can choose for medium and for campaign source, so that you don't run into any miscategorization issues, any misspelling issues, any upper versus lowercase issues, all those things that we've already talked about. And then there is a field where you can enter anything you want for a custom campaign name. And then the tool parses through all this data and creates an automatically updated campaign URL. So let's do an example here. Now, when you get this tool, your team will open it up. You'll type in a URL. So I'm going to do mysite.gov. And I'm going to stick with my email example. So as an analytics person, I'm thinking, okay, how do I want this to appear in my all campaigns report? And how do I make sure that it appears in the email channel report? Well, the beautiful thing about this is that you don't have to worry about that anymore, because we have drop-downs that limit you to what you can select. So I'm just going to select this drop-down, and I'm going to choose email. And then for my campaign resource, I'm going to choose a newsletter. And then here, I'm just going to enter, this is a test 2018. And then this tool parses it and then creates a URL with all of these values. And then you would take that URL and then post it in your email campaign. If you created one for social, you could post it in your social campaign. Now, the beautiful thing about this is you'll be able to go back and you can even put in dates on when you're using these URLs, so that you have a way to document when a specific link was used. So that is the tool that we've built in both Excel and Google Sheets. And you will receive that after today's webcast. So I mentioned before, enter your campaign URLs into the tool. Use the tool to look up your campaigns later on in the campaign report in Google Analytics. And because you're using this tool, you'll instantly know which values you need to look up under medium, source, and campaign. You'll immediately be able to find the values here. So that's exciting. That reduces a lot of work on many people's plates. So one final thought about this, just trust us and download this thing. So we're going to be sending you links to download the tools so that you can access them, start playing with them. Now, every agency uses campaign URLs for different channels. So if you're using paid search, we don't have paid search listed in there, but we can update that for your specific use case if that is a requirement. Just feel free to contact us at DAP support. If you have any questions about the tool, definitely feel free to reach out and let us know. If something isn't clear about the tool, let us know. So I'm sure a lot of you have questions, you have comments, you probably have frustrations with all this conceptual stuff that we've been going over today. Just know that this is complicated material. You're just scratching the surface getting into campaign URL builders. But it is a necessary piece of the puzzle to connect the dots between your offsite marketing campaigns and your website performance. But if you do have any questions, you're always free to email us at dap@support.digitalgov.gov. Now, we're happy to advise you and provide guidance. We have started giving more bespoke campaign URL tagging strategy guidance to a number of folks. So most recently, we've worked with FEMA. We've worked with Department of State on advising folks on how to use campaign URLs and what makes the most sense. So definitely feel free to contact us at dap@support.digitalgov.gov, and we'll be happy to help provide your team with guidance on campaign URLs. And with that, let's take any questions that have come up, Tim.
Sure. Yeah, we do have a couple questions. One thing that I actually answered in the chat box, but I wanted to just rehash, was a question from April, and she was asking about, basically she said the email provider that they use provides click-through rates. So why would, basically, do they need to also use campaign URLs? And just to rehash the answer that I gave in the chat for those that aren't looking at it, one of the big benefits of using the campaign URL structure is that once the data is in Google Analytics, you have a much more of a wealth of information that you can tie to that specific visit. So if your email provider might give you okay, this email had a 20% click-through rate, that's all the information you get. You know, they clicked and then you don't know anything else. Whereas if you can follow that user from the email campaign and Google Analytics has the session data tied to it, you can make broader insights like 50% of all of our visits from that email were in Dallas, Texas, or 90% of the people from that email campaign were using a mobile device rather than a desktop, and that can help inform more. One other thing that I mentioned was that a lot of the email providers like HubSpot or GovDelivery sometimes have already appended their own campaign URLs when you use their services. So I would recommend that everybody check with their provider and see what's already happening and adjust accordingly. But Freddie, here's a question that came in. Mandy asks, can we create our own custom campaign mediums, for example, like fact sheet or other custom mediums that aren't things that we see in the channels report?
You, in theory, could. That's a great question, but it's not best practice. So remember what I said earlier. If you create something for your medium parameter value that Google doesn't know how to process, so let's say you choose green apple for the medium, it will no longer be categorized under the appropriate marketing channel in the default channel grouping report. So the example that I used was email. Let's say you choose green apple instead of email, lowercase email. You will no longer have all of that email traffic grouped into one channel. So you lose visibility, and it makes your life more difficult at the end trying to create reporting to slice and dice the data. What I would do is I would include something like fact sheet in the campaign name. So remember, you can actually go into campaign reporting and pivot off of campaign name. So you could see fact sheet in here and understand all these engagement metrics, but you'd still be able to see medium of email overall and understand total email metrics all in one place. You want to avoid a situation where you have to go into all lowercase email, get these metrics, and then combine them with all uppercase email and get these metrics and mash them together, because that's too time consuming, it's too confusing. And I guarantee you, after you launch campaigns, unless you're documenting all these things, you will not remember which UTM parameters you used. So I would recommend using campaign name for anything custom like that.
Hey, Freddie, can you do me a favor and just go back to a primary dimension of campaign and show what happens when you then click on a specific campaign name?
Sure. Yep. So let's look at let's look at tracking notify.
It's possible that this one will only have one source, but what's great about clicking on a campaign name is it then will break open that particular campaign name into all of your different sources and media, plural
Right.
medium.
Yep.
So in the case that you named your campaign Fact Sheet 2018, and then you sent a link out that was properly attributed to either Facebook or Twitter or email, and then had whatever it may be, social or email, you could say we got 100,000 views from our fact sheet link, and all the outreach we did about our fact sheet, and then you can break it down and say from that it then says, okay, we had 20,000 visitors from Facebook and 10,000 visitors from Twitter and 5,000 visitors from our email and so on. So it provides a really nice breadcrumb for you to be able to click right through.
Yep, totally. That's a great question.
I actually have a question or a suggestion, is that, Freddie has done a great job providing you with some basic things in the drop-down materials. But if you are someone who, let's say, manages a team that does outreach, and you have 5 or 10 different employees that are working for you, and you create a campaign strategy, and you want to make sure everything is tagged correctly, I would even advise going as far as making the column for campaign name also a drop down. And yeah, I'm sure if you don't know how to do that, Freddie can help out if you give an email. But basically, if you can say in the month of June we're going to have 3 different campaigns, and we want to make sure everyone's tagging that with the same campaign name and with case sensitivity, you could just put that in the drop down and then pass that to all of your employees, so they only have the options of choosing things that you're going to track consistently.
That's a great call out. Yep, totally agree.
All right, any other questions from folks on chat? It looks like that's it, and we're about 5 minutes before we would have to wrap up anyways. So I'll toss it back to you for closing, Freddie.
All right, great. Well, thank you all for attending today's webinar. After the webinar, we'll be sending out both the Excel and the Google Sheet version of the campaign URL builder tool. So definitely dig into that. And as always, please contact us at dap@support.digitalgov.gov with any questions about campaign URLs. We are happy to speak by phone. I've met with folks in person, and we're happy to provide that tagging strategy guidance for any questions that you might have, or for anything that doesn't make sense. That's what the DAP team is here for. Please do contact us, and we hope that this material today was helpful. And thanks again for attending.